If you ask any high performance athlete or business professional, they'll tell you that the path to success was never easy and that furthermore, it came with significant guidance of those who forged a path before them. While the attributes that define a mentor may not always be visible to the public eye, what they share behind the scenes with the individual often makes the difference between success and failure. Joining me today to reflect on some of the mentors we've had that have impacted our lives is Al Kovach. Al is editor in chief of PVA Publications. Al, you've had a long and storied career, so we're going to have a good time with this, talking about some of the people that, maybe they were mentors and they did good things in our eyes, and maybe they weren't so great, but this should be a good time.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Bob.
Yeah, Al, you've had a lot of success in your life, three-time national president at the PVA, national hand cycling champion, Navy SEAL, Paralympics. You and I both went to the same games in Atlanta in 96. Lot of stuff has happened in our lives, and many, many miles have passed by. I want you to go ahead and tell me, just for starters, what do you envision the characteristics of a good mentor to be?
Well, I think it's someone that is obviously has a proven track record that they can point to and say to their student, "Hey, look at me. I did this right." But you don't want to be braggadocious about it. You want to teach some humility, be the quiet professional, as they say. And my first mentor that I can recall would be my. I could probably list all my swim coaches from
Undoubtedly.
the coach that taught me how to swim back when I was 5 years old, and back in the 1970, 71, and then, but it all really, I really learned to appreciate mentors when I was swimming in college at Indiana University, and Dr. James Councilman was my coach, and he had just finished up coaching Mark Spitz and some of the other names like Charlie Keating and Hillcox and some big names in swimming. And I could not have been more proud to be a member of the Indiana University swim team. And I was pretty much the little fish in the big pond. I was not his best swimmer. However, he treated every single swimmer the same as far as helping them, and he's really focused on academics and socialization. He wanted to create a very well-rounded swimmer. He didn't want this to be all about who was bringing home medals. It was more about the whole man, as they say.
When it came to Doc and his style, was he the kind of guy who knew the balance between getting too tough on someone and seeing someone have a bad swim, and he doesn't belittle you. He's one of those guys who encourages you instead, correct?
Sure, it was always using the carrot, not the stick. Matter of fact, he was very rarely critical of anybody. He just wanted to kind of like lead the pack, and he expected everybody to keep up with him. I remember his wife would cook. She had four ovens in her kitchen because she would cook lasagna dinner for the entire swim team multiple times over the year. And we also had a great relationship with the dive coach, Hobie Billingsley. He coached some very well known Olympic divers. So between Hobie and Doc, they were together at Indiana for about, I don't know, maybe 25 years. It was a long career together, and they just turned out really good people. It wasn't about who was going to make it to the Olympics. It was more about, he was very proud of what his swimmers did after they graduated from college. And when I went into the SEAL teams, and I was probably away. Let's see, he left Indiana in '87, and I got paralyzed in '91. And he's one of the first people that called me in the hospital.
Wow.
And he had a book that he wrote that every swim coach had on their desk, and he had written a second edition. So he gave me the copy of all of his personal notes in the book, and he signed it to Al, a former IU swimmer and personal friend, and I really did appreciate that. And he would probably call me 3 or 4 times a week when I was in the hospital. Um,
Al,
and he would.
can you take us inside any of those conversations? Was there one thing that you remember where, a really profound moment? Everybody wants to give you encouragement and, tell you, "Hey, it's gonna be okay." But what did Doc say to you that made a difference?
After a workout, he asked to sit. He wanted me to sit next to him on the bench, and he said, He was concerned about my grades. That's it.
Wow.
I knew it then that I had that's all he had to say. I knew that I was in trouble and better start focusing on my grades.
That's pretty ironic because I had the same experience with my high school running coach. I had acted up enough to the point where he had the gall to kick me off the team, and I contacted him years later via email and expressed to him that it was the best thing he ever did because he held me accountable for my actions. And at that point, I thought I was above it all, and he let me know that I wasn't. And those are those little lessons they drag through you, as you go through your life.
Yeah, Bob, knowing you as well as I do, I'm sure you heard that a lot.
Yeah.
What about after your injury? Who was there for you after you got paralyzed? Who mentored you or impacted you the most? Or give me a list of names.
Yeah, wow. I could this could be long and lengthy because there were so many, and it was tough, Al, because I thought I knew it all, and I carried that stick with me on my shoulder even all those early years. But I was really, really super fortunate, man. I fell into just the hotbed of wheelchair racing when I moved out to California, and I mean, I don't know that many people that could say that the people that they got tied in with right away were names like Jim Knob, Candace Cable, George Murray, and many others. I mean, I don't mean to make any of these guys sound like a consolation list, but geez, Mike Trujillo, Mike was a guy. I mean, he was really pertinent to my personal growth. He's got 10 years on me and everything, age and 10 more years in a chair. And having a guy who'd been dealing with a wheelchair since 1968, which sounds so long ago. Uh, I just remember I met Mike, and Mike had this little talk with me because back then a lot of the guys weren't staying real clean, and he had this little talk with me, and I'm like, well, I mean, you've done really well. You made it 10 years. Now here I am at 50 years. And I said, just that. So how'd you do that? And he's like, keep it clean, Bobby. Keep it clean. And I'm like, what do you mean keep it clean? Everything. And that was it. It was like, it was just a really I saw a guy who was sharp. He dressed nice, he got haircuts, he took care of his body, he, returned to school and got a degree in drafting, he went to work, he had a family, he adopted children. He stood for a lot of the things that I admired. And it really helped to make me see in those early days, those first 5 years, what it was that I needed to do to be successful.
I had a rec therapist that I didn't really connect well, but there was another rec therapist that shared the office, and she jumped in and really helped me out. That was Kelly Kalshevsky,
Oh,
and
yeah.
this is going back to June of 1991 is when I met her. And her husband Steve was a similar level of injury as I was, and he was very involved in rugby and racing. And even when I was discharged from the hospital, Kelly and Steve would drive over to my house and teach me how to race. Seating position, stroke technique, etc. And I'm still friends with her today. I can't believe it's been 34 years. She's still there. She's
No, I
changing
know
lives
Kelly,
for
we
hundreds of
got,
people.
we've got to talk to her soon. She was on the forefront of all the rugby. I mean, she's been to all the vet games. She's done so much reffing, but wow, you couldn't really ask for a better mentor than that. I mean,
Yeah,
she was a powerful woman.
yeah, and still is. She's still there. And I remember, she did everything she could to motivate me, but then Carlos Melita was an inpatient at the hospital, and he and I connected, and he's really the one that pushed me over the edge and said, you're a very high functioning quad. You'd probably do really well in racing. And I was at the point in my life where I didn't really want to bring any more attention to my disability. But when I saw Carlos, got to know what he was all about, we we became good friends. He would fly over from Phoenix over to San Diego, stay with me, and we train together. Then I'd fly over to Phoenix and train with him. And I do remember the one time, and I was doing really well. I had done well at the LA Marathon, and I saw that the Paralympics were in my. It was a possibility I might actually make that team. And
Yeah, and you were still pretty green.
yes, yeah, I was probably only 2 or 3 years into it. And, but Carlos realized that he was not gonna make the Paralympics, and I said, "Well, what are you gonna do? Because you're just not gonna do races all the time. There's must be more to it than this." He goes, "Well, I think I'm gonna do the Hawaiian Ironman." I thought he was nuts. Then, of course, he wins it, like, 5 times.
Carlos was, he was an amazing athlete. For Carlos, I was just reflecting when you were talking about Iron Man. There was just never enough challenge for Carlos. If it was hard, he had to make it harder. If it was impossible, he had to prove that it wasn't impossible. He was a great mentor to many of us.
Sure, sure, when once, Challenge Athletes Foundation was, created, I served on their board of directors in the late '90s, as they were just getting started, and, you know, they immediately attacked Carlos became part of that, like, Challenge Athletes Foundation mafia, and, I mean that in a good way. He was definitely one of their, he was always a regular, clinic instructor. He was always hosting clinics, always willing to, you know, spend time with some of the newest, kids that were getting involved in racing or in triathlons. He was always a person that was giving back, and
Yeah.
there is one
What
person who's not in a wheelchair who had a big impact on me on giving back, and that was Ross Earhart. Um, yeah, Ross was a bomb meter navigator on an A6 during Vietnam, and,
Mhm.
his
Right.
wife lost her leg, through the hip in a water skiing accident, and the 2 of them started a ski program in Durango, ASA Durango. That's where I learned how to ski, but more importantly, Ross was about giving back to the community, and he started a Kiwanis club that raised I think the total was something like $3.5 million over the decades that we had that club, and, we had an impact on about, 4 or 5,000 athletes. So, I learned to give back to I was always so focused on myself when I was an athlete, but when I got beyond that competitive stage, I thought I really need to give back to those who supported me. And so that's why I give back to Paralyzed Veterans of America, Challenge Athletes Foundation, etc. Um, those are 2 wonderful organizations that are really having an impact on people's lives.
I know earlier you talked about, I want to touch on Kanab. Jim Kanab he was a mentor. No, rest in peace. Jim passed recently, and but Jim was hardly the nicest guy ever, but he sure did a lot for the sport,
Yeah.
and I would say more than anything, he was that guy. He was the first guy in my eyes who made disability look cool. I even remember a Sport and Spoke shot on the cover where Jim is breaking the tape and his sunglasses are hanging at the bridge of his nose, and I was like, I read that edition cover to cover like 50 times, just thinking, I want to do that.
Well, but by the time I got to know Jim, it was late '90s, and he's already beyond dressing up like that the spandex that looked like like a
The
cowl or
Dalmatian
or like
and
a
the
gateway
yeah, and the
computer nut.
cyborg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But by this time, he was pretty much retired from competitive racing, but he was still training a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but, I'd hang out at his house and he'd be eating a lot of steaks, just a lot of food. He's putting on a lot of weight, but,
Yeah.
uh, but when you hang out at his house, it was pretty eclectic collection of personal accomplishments. It was almost like being in a shrine, and it really did make me appreciate what he had done. And you mentioned the acting. There was so many other things about Jim that made him really a really a pioneer, if you want to call it that. It wasn't just racing.
No, I completely agree. Jim was definitely he was iconic. Handsome guy. He was just everything that said, "Hey, don't feel sorry for me." And if you did, he found a way to not make you feel sorry for him. Hey, I want to touch on one other person who was really significant in my life, and that was George Murray. Everyone knows George Murray as the guy who was on the Wheaties box. Um, George was hurt in the '60s, and as was Trujillo, but George forged an interesting path, and I had met a number of people at that time, but what I thought was really cool about George was that he took a really scientific approach to our life in a wheelchair. Everything was adapted. There was just nothing that was exactly the way it was coming out of the shop. And I like that he adapted. He made the world adapt to him in a way, which I
Okay.
found really, really unique. And the guy, I know you went cross country on a hand cycle. He went cross country in a racing chair. I mean, which is just nuts to me. He and Phil Carpenter, they did what was called the Continental Quest. It's a book, and they went cross country. They pushed their chairs. They talked about, hanging parachutes off the back of their chair and going down the Rockies, to try and slow their chairs. It was just a crazy story. But George, I mean, just sitting in George. So George was also a co-founder of Top End, which was just a premier racing company in that time and age. And I got to stay at George's house and talk with him and hear his stories. And I'm just 25 years old, and I'm sitting in the room with this guy who's banging on 40, and he's been to Paralympic games in countries where there were no ramps and barely accessibility of bathrooms and etc. Just a fascinating guy. I looked at him from the standpoint of my mid-level injury, and he had true success.
Yeah, yeah. Most of the time, people, when we talk about mentors, we think about the kids. I know you and I have been involved in plenty of junior wheelchair sports camps, but I think you're never too old to be mentored. And I'm 60 years old. I'm still learning stuff. So one thing I have to say is that uh, sports has taught me a lot. Adaptive sports, especially, has taught me a lot about myself. And I do lean on some of those things as I get older, even though it has nothing to do with sports. Um, just staying focused, dedicated, and being aware of your situation. I really do miss the days of being competitive, but I'm grateful for it. But I've moved on.